Good morning, everyone. Tuesday morning here for the live. So funny, I'm wearing this very nice lacy top and wool socks because it's so freaking cold here. It's like damp and rainy and cold. Happy to be here as always. So if you are here, let me know live. If you're watching the replay, let me know. And if I don't notice your comments while I'm doing this, I will respond to them later. So today I want to share stuff that I know about boundaries. And I would say that I am a self-certified boundary queen. I am very in tune with my boundaries, and sometimes my boundaries are actually a little bit too solid. So I've actually had to learn how to say yes more than no, which is a superpower in all the ways that superpowers are. You know, it has its cost and it has its benefit. So this is what I want to share with you today. 3 different ways to look at boundaries. And I don't think people talk about boundaries in this way. So I want to share maybe a unique perspective on boundaries. And then I want to share the 3 biggest things that I have learned about boundaries. Even the word boundary is very interesting. For me, it has this heaviness and this solidness to it, which I just think is interesting. Language is interesting. So I want to start off by doing this little exercise with you. So whether you are live or watching the replay, I want you to close your eyes. And maybe we'll just take a few breaths together to come into our bodies in the present moment as much as we can, knowing that we're in the middle of our day. And I just want you to think of the word boundary and pay attention to the thoughts that come into your head. Become aware of sensations that happen in your body, whether it's a tightening sensation or a loosening sensation. And just associations that you have with that word, boundary. And even this small exploration can help you to feel your approach to and view of boundaries, which is either helpful for you or not helpful, or a beautiful combination of both. Okay. 3 ways to look at boundaries. So boundaries are, for me, if we could think of them as an entity, they are this beautifully, exquisitely attuned entities that are all about you. Boundaries are uniquely designed for us, and we can think of them as this uniquely designed layer of protective warriors. When I say uniquely designed, what I mean is, first of all, they are not the same as other people. So you could be hanging out with someone and you have a boundary that is different from their boundaries. And the practice of claiming our unique boundary, which is not the same as someone else, is a beautiful self-care practice. Like, I don't know, you go on a trip with someone and their nervous system or their capacity to be stimulated all day long allows them to be out and about all day long. And you do have a different system, a different nervous system, a different capacity to take in and digest information. So for you, a boundary might be like every afternoon for a few hours, you need to go back to the hotel and just chill and think about your day. And it's different from your friend, and it's exquisitely and perfectly designed for you. It's like your little warriors know who you are and what you need. If we think of boundaries as being this alive thing, they are not static. They are not like walls that we build and never move, but they are alive. They are flexible and they are fluid, which means that they change with us. So we might have boundaries over a certain issue that then gets released and loosened. So even thinking of boundaries as being breathing, alive things that are flexible and fluid allows us to make mistakes, allows us to fail, allows us to change our minds, allows us to play, allows us to learn. And what I mean by that is, when I was talking about what the word boundary feels like, there is a heaviness and a immovability about boundary. It's like you make it and it stays. What I'm offering is this feeling of a boundary that is a something that responds in the moment to us, knowing that we are always changing and evolving. And I know for the type A personalities, that's so freaking annoying, because we want to just like have our boundaries in place, know what they are, and then get on with our lives. But if we can think about boundaries as being this really alive plugging in to who we are in the moment, but also what we need, like this sweet calibration, a constant calibration of us, then I think that allows us to, first of all, to let our boundaries like come in as they need to and then open up as they need to. It allows us to think of our boundaries not as things that are restrictive, but things that are protective and loving and allowed to shift as we shift. And I think that's a beautiful way to look at boundaries. And they are alive, so we're allowed to fuck them up. Like, we're allowed to make mistakes. We're allowed to be like, oh, I had that boundary, but it's not working for me, so now I change it. And we live in a world that wants humans to be consistent all the frickin' time. But we're not, because we're humans and we're changing, especially women, we change all the time. So if we think of our boundaries as moving and fluid and flexible, then we get to be like, what's my boundary today? Because it's not the same as it was yesterday. Maybe I have more capacity today. Maybe I have less capacity today. I once had this image of a boundary as being like I was inside a castle. And this is, I don't think the exact same metaphor I would use now, because there's something that's a little bit too hard about it. And there are moments when actually I do like that hardness and that concreteness. But that I was inside a castle, and around the castle were like these women warriors with like baying wolves, and they were the protectors of my boundaries. And I just love that image, the image of boundaries being protection. Which leads me to another thing that I think is really interesting to think about with boundaries. I've had places in my life where boundaries were like hands pushing away, and they felt more like fighting against something. And there was, for me, a rigidness, a control, a resistance to change, a resistance to even soften and reconsider. They were like hard, and there was fear around them, and anger and rebellion, and there were times when those suited me. And then as I grew in my evolution as a woman, as a human, like we all do, the idea that boundaries could be used to fight for something was a really interesting idea for me. As opposed to saying no against something, what am I saying yes to? And it's this idea of boundaries being created by desires, being created by the things that I want, not being walls up against the things that I don't want. There is something that is very alive about boundaries created by desire. And I think it has allowed me to have a certain grace and a certain knowing, and an ease and a pleasure in claiming my boundaries because they come from such places of desire. For example, this is the way that I desire to connect with my kids. So I have boundaries over the ways that I connect with my kids. There are things that I don't like to do with my kids, and I won't do them for the most part. There are ways that I like to be connected with my kids, and those ways of connecting with my kids are where I can be my most loving self, where I can enjoy them the most. And so the boundaries that I create on the ways that I interact with them feel less guided by like, no, I don't want to do that, but more, I want to really enjoy our time together. My desire is that I delight in you and you delight in me, and therefore I have this boundary, this breathing, fluid, flexible, alive boundary to allow me to achieve that desire. The other thing that I've found with that perspective is that boundaries, of course, come up mostly in relationship, which means that we're communicating our boundaries all the time. In communicating a boundary, I have had way more success communicating a boundary that is led by desire than communicating a boundary that is about big wall, no, what I don't want, what I'm fighting against. And, caveat, there are perfect times for a very strong boundary, which is an absolute hand no. So I want to also presence that in the conversation. But what I'm talking about is this idea that a boundary can be either fighting against something or fighting for something. And even in that change of perspective, we can play with what it's like to have boundaries that are fed by our desires, that actually it is the desire for what we want in our lives, the desire for the people that we want to hang out with, the desire for how we want to hang out with them, in what ways we want to be nourished by other people, that can just lead to this gentleness, this gentle fierceness about boundaries. And I really love that. That has been a very helpful way for me to look at boundaries. Two other things that I want to talk about in boundaries lessons. This is my personal perspective. So if it works for you, great. If it doesn't, great. There are a million reasons always to override a boundary, right? So a boundary like saying yes to somebody who's made a request of me. Here are some of the thoughts that would go through my head. You're not nice if you set that boundary. Like, say somebody wants me to do something and I don't want to. So the voices are, this is a friend of yours. You're not going to be a good friend. It's a one-time ask. Why can't you do it just this one time? You're letting them down. Last time when they asked, you said yes. You're not allowed to change your mind. You have to be consistent. You're supposed to be a reliable friend. Don't you want to be the kind of friend that will always say yes or will always come to somebody's request, right? This is what good friends do. You actually do have the time to do it right now, so you should do it. I mean, the list goes on, and I know you have your own list. There are a million reasons always to override a boundary. A boundary is saying no when everything is telling us to say yes. What we've done before is a yes. The default is a yes. Expectations are yes. A sense of obligation are yes. The good wife, good friend, good mother, good girl is all saying yes. So boundaries require an intention behind them. Otherwise, they're not boundaries. They're just going with the flow. There are always a million reasons to override a boundary. So what I have found is that I very rarely override a boundary, because in my experience, I know how easy it is for one time to become another time, to become another time, and then all of a sudden there is no boundary. So I'm very intentional with my boundaries, and I very, very rarely override something. And when I say override something, it's like I just go to what I want and what I don't want. And those are how my boundaries are constructed and curated, and just absolutely holding on to that no matter what. For me, slippery slope is like sometimes I override a boundary and sometimes I don't. So I keep my boundaries very intentionally firm. I very rarely override one. So that's something that I have learned and I will pass on to you. Here's the other really interesting thing about boundaries that sometimes we don't talk enough about is we cannot have boundaries if we don't know what we want. And if we're not plugged into our self. When I am in a moment of huge indecision, something has been asked of me and I can't decide whether I want to say yes or no. I am in such conflict. And all I hear are other voices. It's like my head is filled with yammerings and chatterings and endless voices of other people. And I literally am paralyzed by indecision. That's when I know that I have become unplugged from myself because I don't know what I want. And the only times I don't know what I want is when I've been unplugged from myself, meaning I have not been here. I have not been here. I have not been here. I can't hear my own voice. I can't feel my own body. I have no concept of in this moment what is going on with me, the truth of this moment, and the truth of what I want. Has that ever happened to you? You're like, I can't fucking make up my mind. I'm so like, I can't believe that I'm agonizing over this stupid decision. So do a quick check-in. Is this because I've just become unplugged from myself? Like I've had a really busy day or a busy week or a busy month. I actually don't know my own voice in this moment. And then we just got to plug right back in before we make any decisions. And you're allowed to take your time. You don't have to respond right away. You don't have to say yes right away or no right away. Just like don't answer the email for a while. Plug back in. How do you plug back in? I don't know. I know that for me, plugging into my sensuality and my sexual energy is a really good way for me to plug in. Sometimes that's really high energy and sometimes it's soft energy. So I have to leave everything. Boundary. I have to do what I need to do to plug back in, come back into my own wisdom, center myself as the primary voice that I am hearing. And then from there, I can move to the question, what do I want? And then the boundary is curated from that desire. If we don't know what we want, we can't have boundaries. It seems so obvious, and yet in conversations about boundaries, we very rarely talk about the importance of knowing what you want. If boundaries are those, like, for me, the wild warrior women circling around me with the wolf pack and taking sweet, fierce, loving care of me, if we have no idea of what we want, then there's no need for boundaries. Then our boundaries perhaps are created by things that we think we should have, ways that other people have boundaries, or we have no boundaries and we're just in response and conversation with other people's boundaries. So the importance of knowing what we want is supreme. And when we have boundaries that are built on our desires, not necessarily always fighting against what we don't want, but fighting for what we do want, then our boundaries become, and the way that they show up in our bodies, become this exquisite attention on ourselves and who we are in the moment, what we need in the moment, and also this calibration system, right? What did I have a little bit too much of? What was a bit too much? What was too little? What do I want more of? And this is when, full circle, they come back to this breathing, alive, exquisitely attuned presence entity, which is beautiful and fun to play with. and fun to help design the life that we want. So 3 ways to look at boundaries. I'm hoping that I actually covered these. They're uniquely designed. So they are this fierce indication of who you are in the moment and what you need. They are telling us something. They're not the same as other people's. They are fluid and flexible, so they can change, and they are alive. Like, we're allowed to play with them and learn and make mistakes and change our minds and like have this boundary, but then it doesn't suit us anymore. And then the 3 biggest lessons that I wanted to share is the importance, I'm going to work backwards, the importance of knowing what we want and being plugged into self, and recognizing those times where we can't make a decision, we can't come up with boundaries, and then just asking the question, am I unplugged from myself? Is that what's going on here? Am I unable to set a boundary or make a decision because I actually don't know what I want? In which case, you get your wolf pack. Your wolf pack is like, halt there. You take the time. What do I need to plug back into myself? What do I need? What time do I need? Or questions do I need to figure out what I want? And then the boundary comes from that. There are a million reasons to override boundaries. Always. There will always be reasons. And only you get to decide whether you never override them, whether you sometimes override them, whether you're always overriding them, in which case maybe a new design of boundaries is needed. And then this last idea of boundaries being created from desire. So being able to hold the 2 ideas of boundaries being fighting against something and then boundaries being fighting for something. What do you think? What has your experience of boundaries been? What has your experience of boundaries been? I would love to hear your wisdom, your story, your thoughts, and ask me any other questions you like, because I love talking boundaries. I'm a boundary queen. Thank you so much for being here. As always, I'm grateful for your time and your attention, and I will see you online.